Drinks, food, art, fun. This is Hops and Spirits Kentucky.
Boy, has it been hot. Hopefully you've got some good AC. You've been able to go to the pool, the lake, somewhere to stay cool. Because I know it's been a hot one in Kentucky. We're definitely experiencing summer finally. Got another fun episode for you this week. We went music festivals, bourbon festivals. Last week we were definitely in the festival spirit. Now this week we're headed back to drinks and sake. But before that, what's pouring? Some news and notes from around Kentucky. The Ketch Seafood Grill has been sold after 28 years in operation in Lexington. According to its Facebook page, unspecified investors have purchased the business and building and intend to transform them. Feast BBQ in Louisville announced on its Facebook that its Jeffersontown location is now closed after 5 years of business. Its new location, though, will stay open 7 days a week, so you can still get its hickory smoked barbecue, crispy tots, and bourbon slushies. And opening, Schnitzelburg will soon be home to a new breakfast restaurant later this month. Breakfast AF will be located at 1008 Goss Avenue, and it specializes in omelets. The restaurant isn't just for morning people either. It plans to be open 7 days a week, morning and night. A new speakeasy is coming to 109 Constitution Street in Lexington. If you know the password, then be sure to check out Constitution Rare and Antique Books. The cozy atmosphere pairs well with its specialty book-themed cocktails. Bluegrass Greensource will host its annual Tacos N Tequila fundraiser on Friday, August 18th. Snag a ticket to join the nonprofit at the Celestatory at Gray Line Station in Lexington, where you can snack on tacos, sip tequila, and learn more about how to build a more sustainable environment. The inaugural Louisville Black Chef Showcase will be held on Sunday, August 13th at the Henry Clay. The tasting event will feature over a dozen of Louisville's best black chefs. All profits from the event will benefit the Louisville Urban League. Tickets are $50. One of Northern Kentucky's largest distilleries showcased their recently renovated first floor. This past Saturday, New Riff hosted a grand opening that officially unveiled their upgraded gift shop, outdoor patio, and new tasting bar. And last but not least in news, Yelp named Copper Kings Distillery as the must-visit rooftop restaurant and bar in the Commonwealth. The Butchertown spot there in Louisville features cocktails that showcase American brandy and a food menu that's driven by Kentucky's seasonally available fare. Up next is our Q&A with Justin LeVaughn, co-owner and head brewer of the Void Sake in Lexington. They got a lot of cool things happening. Enjoy.
Remember to check out Hops and Spirits on social media at Hops Spirits, all one word, on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also find Hops and Spirits on YouTube and at hopsspirits.com.
Joining us for our Q&A this week, he's one of the co-owners, and he's the Toji, or head brewer there at the Void Sake in Lexington. Welcome in, Justin LeVaughn.
Hi, thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. And did I say that right? Is it Toji? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Toji, or I just say head brewer, but people like to use the lingo.
I like it. Well, we are talking about sake, and it's something a little different, but it definitely fits in the drinks mold here in Kentucky. And before we jump into all of that, I call this the Cliff Notes version, just a little bit about yourself, because I've got plenty of questions to ask.
Okay. So named Justin LeVaughn. So I did initially kind of took a roundabout way to get into brewing and owning a business, but started out, I got my undergrad training in cell and developmental biology at UK. Did some graduate student work there, and then actually went into science teaching and did that for a little bit, and then kind of stumbled into brewing. Worked at a local beer brewery here in town, and still kind of do their quality control work for them. But during that time, well, I guess before that, then started home brewing and kind of got into it that way, and then fell into the commercial brewing through doing that quality control, and then kind of stumbled upon sake. We initially just kind of fell in love with the process. It's a unique, we can talk more about like how it's made, but really one particular point in it, or ingredient, is called koji, which is the mold that breaks down the starches for fermentation to happen. But we had never heard or messed with that organism. So we did a bunch of like beers for for a festival with Japanese ingredients in the beers. And then the rest is kind of history, I guess. We just kept messing around with making sake. The first time we made it, it wasn't half bad. It wasn't like rice fire water. And then just kept perfecting the process over a couple of years. And then got to the point where we felt comfortable pursuing, Kentucky's first and only sake brewery at the moment.
Well, and I was gonna say, how I'm guessing you've had an itch, being in that science background. I think people, if they don't know, there's a ton of science that goes into brewing, distilling, everything. It's not as simple as folks may think when they're getting it, on tap somewhere or a can. But so I'm guessing, did you always have a love of, like, say, craft beer or stuff like that, or was that kind of just as things progressed, you got more interested into things like that?
I think it started out like with the home brewing, because that's I'm sure a bunch of your viewers and listeners locally remember Pazos, and they used to do like the Wednesday night pint nights. And man, how long ago was that? That's probably 2010 or 2009 or something like that, 2008. And we started going to those because I was working at UK at the time, and that's kind of how I got into craft beer. And then using my science background to homebrew, because that's where a lot of the micro chemistry and microbiology aspect of it came from. And that was kind of my launching point into the craft beer world. And at that point, it was starting to boom here in Kentucky, and I guess in the US was kind of hitting its exponential growth in that time. But yeah, I just kind of stumbled upon it, and then fell in love with the whole, like, the craft, and more like similar to how when somebody's cooking or baking, they kind of fall in love with the processes and the science of it that way.
Well, and then obviously sake is a different route. Is that another one that you just grew to love? Like, how did you stumble upon that beverage?
So I had sake before, but it's pretty much like everybody's experiences. So when people come into the tasting room or tap room, they don't have very much. They've probably had sake a few times, and it's usually at a hibachi place where they squirt it in your mouth, sake bombs, or they've had it with sushi and stuff. And so I've had it before, and Lexington's pretty unique in Kentucky in that with the universities here, there's a lot of Asian foreign exchange students, particularly from Japan, and also with Toyota being here. There's also a lot of like ethnic foods here. So pretty, I guess, pretty broad category of stuff for people in Lexington to try. And so that's kind of where I got more into it. And it was just kind of like a fun drink, unique beverage. But it wasn't until like actually making it that I kind of just went down the rabbit hole for it. But yeah.
Well, and speaking of that rabbit hole, when did you go from, like, say, doing this as a home brew or kind of with the brewery that you still kind of work with and so forth, and go, okay, we can make this a business? Like, there's a hole here. Obviously, you're the one and only in Kentucky, and I'm sure probably one of the only few in the US in general. So when was it like, hey, let's make a business out of this?
It was kind of, I guess kind of in the later stages of home brewing. Myself and also the two other owners, Brandon Sloan and Joe Rice, we had all been home brewers before. Brandon probably more, or probably for the longest, because he actually opened up Ethereal Brewing, and that's kind of where we met, is when I was working with Ethereal Brewing. But with home brewing, it's kind of, you, like any hobby, you start small, and then you buy all the toys and work your way up and get more and more complex. And it wasn't until I started working in the commercial brewing scene or commercial or beverage manufacturer and things like that, learning kind of what goes into I guess the quality control of it, and consistency is the big thing. Because a lot of people have, when you start home brewing and you taste stuff, it's, man, this is really good. I could make this for like people to buy. And, that's no, not the full story, but, working in a commercial scene, getting that consistency down and kind of those order of operations and kind of critical procedures for like making something that people want to buy on a consistent basis. But it wasn't until, I'd say it was probably once we started home or, making this stuff on our own, trying to get as much information as we could. Because at that time, there wasn't a lot of English translated material. But once we got to a point where we were consistently making a good product in our minds, and then we saw the potential for it to only get better, especially when you scale things up, when you're kind of doing it in your garage. Once you get on a bigger scale and you can kind of automate it and mechanize it a little bit more, then you can start nailing in consistency. But I would probably say after about 2-3 years, when we started brewing it, we got to a point where this is really good. We can't get anything else in our market here. Now, that was probably about 5 years ago, which has changed since then. But even now, like a lot of the stuff is kind of mass and in our market, we kind of fill a specific niche that those products don't fulfill. And that's where we kind of saw that. And then that we kind of said to ourselves, like, yeah, I think this could be, a sustainable business. And then we took the leap.
Well, and so far so good, and we'll talk about that here in a second, because you guys just celebrated your 2-year anniversary, and obviously I'm sure there's a lot that has gone on in those 2 years. But how did you guys settle on the name, The Void Sake?
You should tell people too, like, that because we're the first only in Kentucky, and then really there's only, I think at this recording, probably like 19, 20-ish sake or craft sake breweries in the US, or North America rather. So the name kind of came from our love of kind of sci-fi and science related stuff, particularly like we like kind of cosmic horror type stuff and like sci-fi horror. But also kind of turning that on its head, where the theme is kind of fear of the unknown. Sake is kind of an unknown niche beverage, but we kind of like to twist that and say it's a fun thing. So the intrigue of what's not known about this kind of mystery beverage. But also too, like void, we're filling the void of sake and sake consumers in this area and region. But we're all nerds at heart. And so the kind of branding and iconography behind the void grew out of our love for nerdy stuff and sci-fi and gaming, and actually like D&D and tabletop role-playing is kind of that nautical kind of occult mystery sci-fi theme kind of grew out of that.
I love that. I love it. It's always cool to see where a name can come from, because sometimes it's very simple, then other times there's a lot that's behind it, and it's cool to see that story. And you touched on this too with talking about the process of making sake is definitely different than beer, because you're fermenting the koji. How different though is it, and is there any similarities between it and say beer that folks might be used to?
Yeah. So I guess the biggest thing is with beer brewing, all the kind of labor and stuff that you're doing is front loaded. So you're doing your mash, you have your malted barley, you're adding hot water to it to release those enzymes. Then you hold it at that temperature for a little bit to get your sugar. Then you move it to another tank, you boil it, you add your hops, then you move it to another tank and you add your yeast. So that's what we call more or less like, beer, it's not really a simple fermentation, but it's kind of that one stage fermentation. Whereas wine, you have all your sugar already, and smash the grapes, crush them, and then add your yeast. Same thing with cider. Those would be more or less simple fermentation. Sake is a little bit more complex, because we don't use malted rice. So the rice we get is milled, and so we're doing that to kind of shave off all the outer bits of the rice, which has a lot of the flavor in rice. So we're trying to remove mainly the fats and kind of other proteins that can give sake more robust flavors. And we're milling that away. So we're trying to get to the center of that grain, which is kind of just the starchy center. So we're concentrating those starches. Well, that embryo that they use for malting to germinate the seed to create the enzymes is long and dead. So we need another organism to break down those starches so the yeast can ferment. And that's where the koji comes in. So already we're milling our grain. We're not malting it. We have a second organism that we're growing on a portion of that rice. And then we're adding that with more rice. So we have koji rice, we have fresh steamed rice, water, and yeast. And those are kind of the four main ingredients in sake. So those get thrown into a tank, and they're all just mashing and fermenting together. So in the sake biz, we call that multiple parallel fermentation, which is just what do you call it? That multiple parallel fermentation, or the name escapes me. But anyway, so we're having the koji breaking down the sugars and the yeast fermenting those sugars all happening in the same tank. So that's one key difference. So the mash and the fermentation are at the same time, whereas beer, you mash, you boil, and you ferment it. Same thing with wine. You may smash the grapes, get the juice out, and then ferment it. So there's some technical challenges there to make sure that you get all your sugar and all your alcohol there. But because we're doing that, we have to have tanks where we can manually agitate and stir it. And once you build that up to a certain scale, it's either just more muscle power or to mechanize stir it. But that's the biggest thing. And then the alcohol generation is much slower and longer. It's more akin to a lager ferment, or even like a very long wine ferment. So we keep it cold, so a low and slow fermentation, so we're not getting a lot of boozy alcohols out of it. And then after that, you got to press it. So you got to separate all that unwanted bits in the yeast from that. And then, it goes into a tank. So there's some similarities there, but the biggest thing is the fermentations are completely different.
Well, it sounds like a little bit of a labor of love too.
Yeah. So as I was saying before, with beer and wine, a lot of that stuff is front loaded at the beginning. And then, there's some other labor and stuff that goes into, filtering, fining, conditioning that. With sake, it's spread throughout the entire process.
So not a whole lot of down days for you.
No. And then another thing to think about, like in our batches, you have to steam a lot of rice. And so it's not just putting on a lot like tabletop rice steamers, we're steaming anywhere from like 100 to 300 pounds of rice at once. And so there's some other engineering and technical challenges that come into that as well. So steaming the rice, not burning yourself, cooling it down so you can add it and not cook your yeast. But as far as similarities, the equipment, we're not being in Japan, like we don't have access to a lot of specialized equipment that they do over there. We can get it, but it's very expensive to ship it over. And it's getting better. With the boom of sake in the US, there's more companies coming over from Japan to kind of sell and distribute equipment over here, but we've had to retrofit a lot of our equipment from existing brewery and winemaking equipment. And then a few pieces that we had to make or get commissioned to fabricate completely from scratch. So.
Well, it seems to be going well for y'all, because like I said, you just celebrated your 2-year anniversary, and what's it been like, that reception, and also I'm guessing you're doing a lot of education every time someone comes to visit.
That was part of the like one of our core goals moving into the business. So when we said, it's not just making good sake, it's a niche product that not people have heard about, they've had it maybe on the off couple of times, but they don't know about it. And so building that appreciation for a beverage that that we love and appreciate, but also educating people. So that's a big thing. And went into, like, when we opened, or when we were wanting to open this business, is how we're going to educate the public to appreciate not just our product, but just sake in general. And so we do tours and tastings. The 3 owners and the 2 other owners and myself, we took a professional sake course to kind of get some, accolades to show people that, we're taught, but also to give people that reassurance and also that education piece. So when they come into the bar, and it started out with just us, because we were just educating face to face. So it was just us behind the bar. And so we had that direct connection with our consumers. But now that we have more bar staff, we make a point to educate our staff, to give them the resources to be able to talk to customers, and also, spread the same love that they have and we have about the product. As far as reception goes, I think with that being one of our core kind of tenets of the business or values, people see that, and the reception has been very, very good. A lot of people in Lexington and Central Kentucky in general, and even Kentucky overall, Lexington craft beer drinkers are very adventurous, so they're willing to try anything once or twice. So that's why we kind of stuck here. Is we know we were familiar with the craft beer community and kind of the adventurous aspect of that culture, and kind of catering to that, to bring people in with more non-traditional sakes, which you wouldn't really find in Japan, but are more American craft focused. And then we can, kind of educate them more about more of the traditional, styles that what we offer, or what sake has to offer.
Well, I was going to say, when people go there and visit, they're going to be probably amazed that you guys kind of do those, what some might consider experimental, and that, you could get a coffee style sake, like with Nate's Coffee and things like that. So you guys are kind of bridging that little gap between, craft beer and sake.
Yeah. And so we kind of joke, is like our little, tagline is where Japanese tradition meets American craft. And so kind of our, like, I guess, philosophy is that if you're going to, introduce people to a new beverage, kind of meet them closer to where they're at, but also give them avenues to kind of expand their horizons. So kind of focusing on very experimental stuff, stuff that people are more familiar with, like you said, coffee infused sake. People love coffee infused beers. And then also too, like, we initially early on, we had done, or myself and Brandon had done a lot with meads, which is, honey wine, fermented honey. But a big part of that is fruited meads or fruited wines. So we have things like tangerine creamsicle, or blueberry and espresso, horchata infused. So things to get people, pique their interest and kind of wow them. to bring them into the door. And then like once they're in front of us, then they're an open book and we can kind of educate and start from nothing and build onto something.
Well, and another way I think you guys have been able to bring some folks in the doors is I think there's a love of music there as well, because y'all have pulled in some pretty cool bands. I think Mama said string band's coming up here soon. The String Dusters were there. Like, who's got the love of music that's able to be pulling in some of these fun groups?
All of us have a pretty eclectic like love of just any music, whether it's like jazz. Actually, we were jamming out to some like subway street jazz, and then bluegrass. So I'd say that so I'm probably not the biggest music nerd, but Brandon and Joe especially, they have a big love for bluegrass and things like that, and that's where it kind of started from. And we used to all hang out at the Burl, Manchester Music Hall, the Dame back in the day. So that it just kind of grew from that. And the space that we have is we try to keep that like very low lit, intimate kind of feel and vibe. And I used to go to a lot of kind of jazz kind of bars with my dad, and I love that kind of intimate aspect of it, and it just kind of organically grew from there. And so the space is conducive to that live, one-on-one small music or small venue atmosphere. And so, yeah, sake and music is just a match made in heaven.
Well, you could do mash too. I think that could work. Mash,
yeah.
So.
A mash, yeah.
and you in addition to the Void, you also, I believe, have the Emerge sake seltzer brand too. Is that right? And how did that come about, and why did that come about?
So when we first opened up, we initially, I think we were about to sign a lease for another location to be able to do that brew pub kind of concept, and it was going to be a sake and ramen, bar. But then the shutdown happens, and then we had to pivot. So we were like, well, we know production and distribution, so we'll focus on that. That's where we kind of found our current location. But then once we opened up, we were like, we need like a physical place for people to come in and try stuff. So then we built out our tasting room and tap room. And at that point, we had some food trucks coming in, but we were just coming off the pandemic and there wasn't a lot of options. And so for people to come in, you can't really have very many 15-13% alcohols without food. And so it started off with a low alcohol option for people because especially in Japan, carbonated sakes are pretty popular and low, and generally they can be wine kind of, or sake strength, that 10 to 12%, but some of them are lower alcohol. And so we wanted a lower alcohol option for people so they can stay a little longer, enjoy themselves more often when we do have food trucks. And they just kind of took off because we went for something that people were familiar with. We call them sake seltzers because they kind of drink like a seltzer, but it's our base sake. It's just 5% instead of 15% carbonated. We use we infuse it with all natural ingredients, all natural flavors. And it's just a very dry, crisp crusher that, in the summer, particularly when we started them, people just took to them. And then, we made a whole nother brand on them, those Emerge sparkling sake seltzer brands that have continued to kind of just be a hit in the tasting room.
Well, and it sounds like things are going well, and you guys are doing a lot. But like I said, it's only year 2 technically when the doors have been open and folks have been able to come in and try. And I guess, what does the future hold for y'all, and what are some of the visions that you guys hope to see happen?
Well, so we are we've been trying to go into that original concept that we had with food and to do ramen, because that's where kind of the three of us kind of fell in love with sake. We used to go to local Japanese restaurants, School Sushi, Michikusa, Tachibana, and like after work we would just have like parties where we just drink ramen and drink some sake. And so we wanted to have that ramen component to it. So kind of in the future, we're expanding into food. We've secured a food truck. Probably in the next week or two from this recording, we're going to do our soft open for the Void's kind of ramen food truck. So we'll have a dedicated food option on site for us. Looking to expand the tap room. Month over month and year over year, it's been steadily growing. So just to kind of put more sake, or put sake in more people's hands, or liquid to lips, as we say, and just to kind of build, organically and not too fast, but kind of be like Kentucky's #1 sake. So yeah, a lot of also tune out more traditional styles. One of the things during the shutdown is we couldn't go. We had a trip to Japan planned to do some more learning, but Japan has just opened its borders. And so one of the things that we're getting to do now is we're working with our national trade organization and a brewery in Japan to be able to go to Japan for 2 weeks to learn more about brewing sake. So just trying to perfect our craft and expand it a little bit more. So a lot, we have a lot of things going on kind of in the background, but there's a lot of exciting things that we have lined up for the Void, whether it's new exciting sakes, doing more traditional, more experimental stuff. We released kind of the sake equivalent of a port, which we didn't know how well it would be received, and people have loved it so far. So doing, building up more of that kind of cool experimental repertoire, or repertoire with some of our offerings. So
that sounds like some good things are in the future for y'all, and a fun trip as well. And Justin, thanks for sharing the story of the Void and also of sake.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to kind of share our love for sake, and hopefully your viewers will see this, and if they've never had sake before, come on, give it a try. It's a very magical beverage. So, and
soon to be paired with some ramen noodles.
Yeah. So we have pretty often updates on social media, on Instagram, Facebook. So check us out there. Like I said, the food truck is happening real soon. So that'll be opening up. And so you'll have some of Kentucky's best ramen to pair with some of Kentucky's best sake.
Find more from Hops and Spirits at hopspirits.com.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.